My name is Simone Archer. I am 29 years old. The night before my wedding, my mother-in-law sat my fiancé down in a hotel room and told him she had looked into my past and discovered I had been married twice before, that both marriages had ended badly, and that she believed he deserved to know the truth before he made a decision he could not undo. He did not sleep that night. He almost did not show up to the altar. Then, during the ceremony the following afternoon, our pastor began his blessing and mentioned how long he had known me. What he said next made my mother-in-law stop breathing for a moment in the front row. I grew up in a small city in North Carolina, in a congregation that my family had attended for 3 generations. Our pastor, Reverend Gerald Timmons, had known me since I was 4 years old. He had watched me in the children's choir, had counseled my parents through a difficult stretch when I was 12, had given the eulogy at my grandmother's funeral when I was 17. He was one of those figures in a person's life who exists so consistently across so many years that they become part of the texture of your own history rather than a separate person you simply know. When it came time to choose who would officiate my wedding, there was never a question. It was always going to be Reverend Timmons. I have never been married before. I want to say that plainly and early, because the rest of this story does not make sense unless that fact is settled. I am 29 years old, and I have been in 2 long-term relationships before meeting my husband James, one that lasted about 2 years in my early 20s, and one that lasted 14 months a few years after that. Neither ended in marriage, neither ended in anything close to marriage. They were relationships that ran their course and ended the way relationships sometimes do, without drama and without legal paperwork. I met James 4 years ago through a colleague of his who was a friend of mine. He was from Georgia, had moved to North Carolina for work 2 years before we met, and was the kind of person who took time to fully arrive somewhere, both geographically and emotionally. We dated slowly and carefully for 18 months before becoming serious in the way that generates talk of a shared future, and we were engaged after 3 years together. James's family was from a small town about 2 hours south of where we lived. His mother, Patricia, was a woman who had a strong sense of how things ought to be, and a corresponding distrust of anything that did not fit that picture. I had observed this about her from the first time I met her, not in a hostile way, just as a feature of her personality that was worth understanding. She asked detailed questions, remembered the answers, and cross-referenced them against each other in conversations months later. She was not malicious, I thought. She was simply someone who felt that gathering information was the same as exercising care. What I did not fully appreciate until much later was how far that information gathering could extend when she felt her son was making a decision she had reservations about. Patricia had reservations about me from early on, though she never stated them directly. They came out in the shape of her questions, the particular subjects she returned to, the tone she used when asking about my family background or my employment history or my previous relationships. She asked about the 2 long-term relationships I mentioned in a way that felt more like a deposition than a conversation, and I answered honestly because I had nothing to hide and no particular reason to treat her as an adversary, even when the questions felt pointed. I noticed, over the first year of my engagement to James, that she had a habit of asking the same questions across different conversations, slightly rephrased, as if checking whether the answers would change. They never did, because they were simply true, but I became aware that she was building some kind of case file in her mind, and that whatever she concluded from it would shape how she positioned herself toward our marriage. James and I had talked about his mother's weariness early in our engagement. He acknowledged it, said it was a pattern with people he dated, and had always eventually resolved once his mother got comfortable, and asked me to be patient with it. I was patient. I genuinely tried, not as a performance for him, but because I understood that the people who love someone are allowed to take time deciding whether a new person in that orbit is trustworthy. And I had enough confidence in who I was to believe that time would work in my favor if I gave it the chance. I continued showing up to family events with genuine effort, bringing things when I came, remembering details about people in his family the way I genuinely do when I care about getting to know someone. The week before the wedding, both families arrived in town, and the events that come before a wedding began: rehearsal dinner, a gathering at James's aunt's house, the logistics of out-of-town guests. Through all of it, Patricia was pleasant in a surface way that I had learned to read as her managing something she had not yet decided how to handle. I did not press. I told myself the wedding itself would represent a threshold after which things might naturally ease. The night before the wedding, James and I were staying separately in the same hotel where many of our guests were housed, at the suggestion of his grandmother, who held traditional views about the night before the ceremony. We had agreed to it easily, since it was one night and the request had been made with genuine warmth rather than imposition. Sometime around 10 in the evening, Patricia knocked on James's hotel room door. She asked to speak with him privately. What she told him, sitting in a chair across from his bed in a room 2 floors above, where I was having a quiet call with my own mother, was that she had been doing some research into my background over the past several months, and had found records indicating I had been married before, twice. She said both marriages had ended in divorce. She said she had the documentation. She said she was telling him now because she could not in good conscience let him walk into a marriage without knowing the truth about the woman he was marrying. James told me all of this the following morning, about 45 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, standing in the hotel hallway in his dress shirt with his jacket still hanging on the door behind him. He had tried to call me the night before, but had stopped himself, not wanting to wake me over something that might have an explanation. He had spent most of the night with the information sitting on him, turning it over, unable to sleep, and had decided by morning that he needed to tell me before the ceremony rather than carry it in with him. I told him, standing in that hallway with my hair already done and my dress waiting in the room behind me, that I had never been married. Not once, not twice. I told him the 2 relationships I had described to him honestly early in our relationship were the only 2 serious relationships I had before him, and that neither had involved a legal marriage of any kind. I told him I did not know what documentation his mother believed she had found, but that whatever it was either a mistake or a misrepresentation. He looked at me for a long moment. He knew me. He had known me for 4 years, and I did not think there was a version of me that lived in his mind capable of having hidden 2 marriages from him across all of that time. He said he believed me, that he needed me to know he believed me, but he also said he needed to understand what she had found. I told him we would understand it together, after, and that what I needed from him in the next 40 minutes was to walk into that ceremony and marry me the way we had planned, and that nothing his mother had said changed anything I knew to be true about us. He looked at me for another moment, and then nodded and went back into his room to finish getting ready. We did not confront Patricia before the ceremony. There was no time and no appropriate venue, and I had made a decision that morning that whatever this was, it was not going to rewrite the day we had planned. The ceremony took place in a small chapel about 10 minutes from the hotel. Reverend Timmons was already there when we arrived, his familiar presence in that space doing exactly what it always did, which was make whatever room he occupied feel slightly more grounded than it had before he walked in. He greeted me in the vestibule with the warmth of someone who has watched you grow up and finds genuine satisfaction in what you have grown into. The ceremony moved through its early sections in the unhurried way Reverend Timmons always conducted things, the opening, the readings, the moment of community welcome he always included, in which he spoke briefly to the gathered guests about the couple they were there to witness. It was during this section, speaking in the considered way he had, that made every word feel chosen rather than habitual, that he mentioned he had known me since I was 4 years old. He said he had watched me come into my character across 25 years, and that one of the things he could say with complete confidence, having known me that long, was that I had always been someone who told the truth even when it was inconvenient, who faced things directly rather than around them, and who had arrived at this moment having built her life on an honesty that people who knew her well recognized as fundamental rather than performed. He did not know, standing at that altar, what had been said the night before. He was simply speaking about who I was, in the way a person speaks when they have 25 years of material to draw from. But the specificity of what he said, the directness of the character he described, landed in that room with a weight that Reverend Timmons could not have intended and could not have known was needed. I did not look at Patricia during this. I was looking at James, but I heard, in the slight shift in ambient sound that happens when a room's collective attention adjusts, that something had landed for the people present who were holding the context from the night before. James told me later that he watched his mother's face during Reverend Timmons's words. He said she went very still in the front row, in a way that was distinct from the normal stillness of a guest listening to a ceremony. He said she stayed that way for the remainder of the blessing. We were married. The reception followed and was warm and full of genuine celebration. Patricia was present and functional, making the rounds with the surface pleasantness she was capable of when the situation required it. 3 days after the wedding, James and I sat down with Patricia together at her hotel room before she drove back south. We asked her to show us the documentation she had described to James the night before the ceremony. After a long pause, she produced printouts from an online records search service, the kind that aggregates public records and sells access for a monthly fee. The records showed 2 marriage certificates attached to names similar to mine but not identical, one with a different middle name, one with a different birth year, and both from states I had never lived in. James looked at the printouts and then at his mother and said, "These are not her." Patricia said she had believed that the names had been close enough to warrant bringing it to James's attention, that she had felt it was better to raise it and be wrong than to stay quiet and let him walk into something unknowingly. James said that bringing it to him the night before the wedding as a settled fact rather than a question, with documentation she had not fully verified, had been a choice with consequences that she needed to understand. He said that he had almost not shown up to his own wedding because of information that turned out to be wrong, and that whatever her intentions, the effect of presenting uncertainty as certainty in that moment was something he was going to need time to work through. Patricia apologized. It was a careful apology, the kind that covers the outcome without fully landing on the decision, but it was something, and James accepted it as the beginning of a longer conversation rather than the end of one. We have been married for 7 months. James's relationship with his mother is ongoing and complicated in the way these things often are when a parent oversteps significantly and the adult child has to figure out what the new boundary looks like. They talk regularly. She has visited once. Things are not fully repaired, but they are moving in a direction that feels honest rather than simply smoothed over. I have thought often about what Reverend Timmons said during that blessing, about a person who tells the truth even when it is inconvenient, who faces things directly rather than around them. He was not rescuing me. He did not know a rescue was needed. He was simply describing, in front of everyone, the person he had watched me be across 25 years of knowing me, And that description did exactly what the truth does when it is spoken by someone with no agenda other than accuracy. That is my story. One night, one set of wrong records, and a pastor who had known me long enough that his words carried a weight no one in that room had anticipated needing. If this reminded you of a moment when someone who truly knew you showed up at exactly the right time, drop it in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.